always do, I'll throw to each of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'll probably have us start talking about, are there fandoms we should be paying more attention to? Are there aspects of fandom? Are there applications of fandom? And that noise indicates that we are live. So I think we are good to go. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here on this last day of May. As someone who just had to undergo a major life change and a major move, buying a house and moving across the country, it feels like it should be July already, but I guess it is only the end of May. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this popular culture dialogue. This one is on the underexplored areas of fan studies. So largely, are there fandoms that maybe we could be talking more about? Are there aspects of fandom that we could be looking more at? Or even, are there applications of fan studies that could be useful now? We are talking the day after the conviction of a former president who's had a lot of talk about the cult around him, the voters, the constituents as being a fandom. So that's a big area that maybe fan studies could do more on. But I thought we could get into all of that today. So we've got three lovely people here today to talk about this with us. So I'm going to throw it to each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started. And I'm going to go to my longtime recurring guest, Christine.
Hello, Christine Tomlinson. I am currently a postdoc with the SDU Metaverse Lab at the University of Southern Denmark and a lecturer with the University of California, Irvine in the School of Social Sciences. I generally study video games, but I also find myself teaching about and studying other areas of popular culture. And I am excited to be here to talk a little bit about some of those niche areas of fandom and find out what everyone else here is working on.
Awesome. And have you been to Denmark yet? Or are you still just in California?
Still in California for the time being, but hopefully soon.
Denmark is fantastic, so I hope you enjoy it when you do get to go there and have some time there. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go down then to Allison.
Oh, hi, I am Allison Bumsted. I am a adjunct associate professor with Austin Community College and as well as an instructor with SNHU Online. I have a background in popular music fandom, and I focus on teen fan magazines, as well as first generation Beatles fans and other fandom surrounding the reading and the community within these magazines, which is often very underestimated. So that is what I like to focus on, women in rock and whatnot. And I am very excited to be here and learn about everyone else's areas and have this conversation. Thank you.
Great. And I have to say, I haven't heard of the Dave Clark Five or Herman's Hermits in a long time, but having boomer parents, those are definitely the songs of my childhood. So I look forward to learning more about all of that too. And then we'll go down to Alicia.
Hello, I'm Alicia Spencer-Hall. I'm an honorary research fellow at UCL in London. And I feel a little bit the odd one out, but in a good way, because I primarily work on medieval hagiography. So saints live, and I work on usually 13th century holy women who are like not nuns, but not nuns. They're a bit weird. And I look at kind of critical theory and pop culture in relation to the medieval, but not necessarily the way like you might have medieval TV shows today, but more about how kind of structures from modern times interact with the medieval. So for example, I look at hagiography as a fan genre, and how we can understand saints as celebrities and vice versa, and kind of really kind of make that, you know, that like brain tingle. We're like, oh, a saint is a celebrity. Oh, kind of explore why that works.
I love it, because I've been saying for years that Christians are just fans of Christ. So I would love to pick your brain more about that. Yeah.
I actually talk about hagiography. That's really awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's dive into it then. Maybe the first thing to talk about is, are there fandoms that you think could be getting more attention, whether they are from the past, the present? Is there something maybe that people should be looking more at? Who would ever like to start?
I mean, this is not medieval, but I've had to do a very deep dive into Elon Musk for my book that's coming out. It was some dark days for me on Elon Musk's timeline, and I think the fan cult around certain corporate, and it's usually men, let's face it, but like Elon Musk in particular, then the kind of the canonization of Steve Jobs, that there's kind of, I think, an unwillingness to engage in that kind of like, what is a celebrity? But he is, and his followers are fans. And I think we can unpack actually some really dangerous trends that underpin, particularly Elon Musk's, ever straying to the right, if we use that kind of fan hat on, that I've not really seen much deep critical analysis of yet.
And that's an interesting one too, because I think I've seen, those prayer candles that they have celebrities run it. There's been a Steve Jobs ones of that, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I'm sure I actually live near Austin, so there's the new Tesla factory, which a lot of people just got laid off from moving here. And then one of the persons who makes all those candles sells in a lot of the stores, and everybody and anybody is on these candles, from old Greg to Elon Musk.
That canonization, then it's like the idea of it being ironic, but at the same time it's not ironic, because there's definitely a true affect that's driving all of that.
Indeed. And I think also once you get your own biography, then you really see like Walter Isaacson's written his biography. I mean, that's a big deal. And then you start to see when you read this, like, don't do it unless it's your job, literally. Like these kind of, it's a hagiography of certain male corporate figures. There is a playbook. There is a certain trajectory. There's always that like, oh, now we're going to subvert the trope. But are we really? It is that very, it's the constructedness and that engagement of the fan follower in the identity process that I think it's honestly, it's disconcerting, right? Because if it's with somebody we would all accept as a pop culture celebrity, you can have a bit more of that critical, oh yes, whereas when it's just presented as like, oh, he's just a captain of industry. No.
So that's a good one to start looking into, this idea of non-celebrities who are actually celebrities, or just this reconceptualization of what a popular figure is. And I think I saw, it was either the Washington Post or the New York Times was talking about neo-populism. And I thought that was an interesting thing that we need to be thinking more about too, in relationship to what you were just saying, Alicia. Other thoughts about what we could be paying more attention to?
Well, I'll go. I write about teen fan magazines, especially from the 60s. And in my world in popular music, that's where I really focus. It's something that came to me when I was focusing on a lot of male criticism from the 60s and 70s. And I realized, I was like, where are all the female voices? Where are the teen fan magazines and the things that we actually quote, but we don't ever give credit because we see them as ephemeral? So one of the things I focus on, I do talk actually a little bit about hagiography, and you dropped your book, I'm going to drop mine too. So I have an upcoming book called Teen Set, Teen Fan Magazines and Rock Journalism, and it deals with a lot of this, but one of the big takeaways was teenage fandom, especially young female voices. And this is something across the board that I think we need to be more representative of. And I know it's hard to be representative of minor voices. And I don't mean minor as in small, I mean as in the age range. But it's something that's been ignored for so long because we often see those voices as ephemeral or as unimportant. I remember, and I do mention this I think in 2016 or just somewhere around there, maybe a little bit later, an NPR reporter was really surprised that Teen Vogue mentioned Trump, and I'm not saying anything about politics, I'm just saying what they said, was gaslighting America. That's the words they used. And David Folkenflik of NPR said, I'm surprised to see this from a teen fan magazine. I had taught high school, and my 16-year-olds were using these words. They do know this stuff, and completely underestimate the young fans across the board and their valuable opinion, and the ones who are spending their money on these items and these interests, especially in popular culture. And so that's an area that is really important to me as I've revisited my young voice, as I've talked with a lot of others and their opinions when they were young and how it still matters to them all these years. So that's an area for me that is very, very important, and I think underrated across the board, no matter what fandom we look at.
Yeah, there's that common thing, at least in American culture, about the generational ideas, like the older generations not paying enough attention to younger generations or dismissing them, especially if you then do the intersectional approach and say, well, it's women then too, younger women.
Yeah, younger women.
Yeah, I mean, I know, Christine, with your research on games, younger boys, teenage boys might be getting more attention, especially because of the problematic aspects of behavior that might come into some of their fandoms. But we kind of dismiss younger female fans, but going all the way back to like Elvis Presley and the Beatles, as just being hysterical. I mean, it's like they're just crazy and you don't have to pay attention to them, which time and time again has been proven to not be true, because that's something that continues to this day, and teenage girls are powerful in that.
Yeah, there's an autoethnography, a book by Sibby Sullivan, and she was a first generation Beatles fan. And actually in her title, it's, I don't want to misquote it, but it's something on the lines of a confession from a fan that didn't scream. And so that conversation about like the perception of what screaming meant has blown up in the Beatles world, especially among women, because some women have distanced themselves for it because what people have branded it as, whereas other women, like another woman who I interview, who's wonderful, Debbie Gindler, she was actually at the Ed Sullivan Show and had this amazing life. She has a book out called I Saw Them Standing There, if you're interested. And she talks about it as no, screaming was love. So it's interesting to see the differences and the difference of opinions, and based off of how it's been perceived. So
well, and it kind of goes back to the affect aspect that kind of underlies why we don't see Elon Musk as a fandom object. Sorry, Alicia.
No, that just immediately makes me think of 13th century affective piety, which is usually you've got women who are like, the weirdos who cry for Christ, have sex with Christ in their visions, like do everything in a way that is not okay for the patriarchy. But at the same time, the church, like the celebrity machine, needs them, because like that's how you get like the buzz, man. That's how you get the contact high. And so there's weird like sidelining, but also like for the Beatles to be the Beatles, you need the screaming fans, particularly kind of in my generation, which is that little bit further away. That's how they were the famous. I think in a weirdly similar way, and it's particularly women in the 13th century, it's all about and crying for Christ, but it's joyous, it's love.
It's interesting because it makes me think about pushing something I did a long time ago, this idea of viral marketing and using fans as part of your marketing force, then essentially, and how it's not just the producers seeing the audience as commodity, but seeing the audience as pusher, as being kind of that driving force. And to know that that is something that patriarchal institutions have been doing for centuries is fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
Christine, what do you think we should be maybe looking more at?
Since everyone else is dropping their books.
Go for it.
Do it.
Empower each other.
So I am working on a book under contract, which is hopefully going to be available next year sometime. So communities and online cultures of play, creating and navigating gaming culture.
Nice.
And the thing that I've been interested in is looking at these kind of pockets of culture where people are forming their own identities as like, specifically, I'm a woman fan of this, or I'm a gay fan of this, or I'm a lesbian fan of this, and how that creates new communities within these broader communities and cultures around fandom. I think that that's really interesting because it totally changes the flavor of fandom and how people express themselves and the norms that they create around consuming these fan objects.
Now I'm going to be looking forward to this book, because one of the reasons why I was okay with a move to North Dakota is because I have been interested in rural popular culture, having grown up in it myself. And this idea of creating a space for your own identity, I think, is going to be very important for that, because I think there's like a couple miles away, there's the county fairgrounds where they do like rodeos, and like the state university here, they have a rodeo team that's part of their athletics. And I just wanted to maybe look at like rodeo in terms of the fandom, or looking at like hunting and fishing as fandom and those aspects too, and how it relates to masculine versus feminine, so gender identity, how it relates to political, religious identity. I think could be really interesting.
You could add, I bet the high schools, like our high schools, have barbecue competitions. That might be something. I mean, I'm a hardcore vegetarian, but I do find it fascinating that there's like fans that go and want to taste and be part of these competitions. That would be great to add to the list.
That's a good point, because there is actually an all-you-can-eat charity barbecue event in middle of June where it's like 20-some groups coming together and making all these different types of barbecue, and you just pay like $20 and it's all you can eat, which to me sounds like it will kill me with my, just destroy my heart. But that's the fascinating idea of how the community then is coming together around these objects of fandom too.
I mean, I must say I've never felt more British, because this for me, these are things that I've literally only ever heard about on TV and the internet. So it reminds me of when I went, like, I really like country music, which is a very different valency. I grew up in London. So to be into country music and like Dolly Parton when I was like 15 in like the center of London in Britain was quite like, oh, a bit cool, a bit weird, a bit like, oh. And I wore a Dolly Parton t-shirt to visit a friend in the States, and the looks I got, because again, like the valency of that fandom completely changed. And I was saying, I don't understand, like what is going on? And I think that's really interesting, not just looking at that kind of sub communities, but then the cross-cultural difference of it, particularly online, when you know the geography is so flattened, and yet it still is very important to how you might not leave the house in that shirt, for example. You know, for me, I read like trashy romance with cowboys in because it's so exotic. I could not possibly read like set in London with earls. I'm like, so I think there's also something to do with difference there, you know?
That's so interesting to me. I lived in Liverpool for a long time, which is very different than London, because that's where I went to school, in Liverpool. So it's very embracing of the cowboy, because in the 70s they actually had a lot of clubs and they wore cowboy boots, and they went through these phases. But there's definitely that, I think maybe it's the northern scrap of the Scousers that is just very relatable to the cowboys. They like the Old West. No, they don't like guns, but they do like the idea of the Old West. So it's quite an I was like, well, how can you? Anyways, but it's quite interesting. But I don't think you'd get a look for wearing a Dolly Parton shirt in Liverpool at all.
I don't think so.
No, I don't know how. It's such a different place. Yeah.
But I think there are like bits of London you can wear that shirt to and people will think you're being like clever. It's like, I just like the guys, like that. It's that simple. Whereas I think like I could wear in Liverpool and people would have a conversation with me about the last time they saw Dolly. Do you know what I mean? It's a different thing.
Yeah, because I saw 9 to 5 in Liverpool because I know it toured. Yeah, and everyone was like, woohoo!
Exactly, just like unabashed joy.
Yeah. But that's interesting, like the fandom and the genre or the geography, like you said, even just between two hours away on a train ride. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But I also wonder, because Dolly Parton is a classic figure, but I wonder if you were to wear more recent country stars, or even I don't know how I want to put it, the more jingoistic country stars in the United States. I do wonder how people in the UK would approach that then.
I think honestly, there's so little penetration of awareness that they would not know. I mean, darling, that's not the kind of country I'm into, but
same.
It's like it doesn't get airplay here. Like it's very niche. You have to seek it out. So I'm sure there are some people into it, but I think like say like a country night, you'll have like Dolly Parton and like the old like 80s, maybe 70s, and maybe 90s problematic figures, but you don't necessarily have like the ones now that kind of like the MAGA front line of country. It's weird. But then I wore like a shirt, what is her name? Brandy something. Was it Brandy Clark? And the lyric on it is like, love can go to hell. And I got it at a Camden gig with this country stuff. And people were like, it's a bit edgy, isn't it? A bit edgy. Okay, calm down, people. So again, it's also what people assume country means. As I think, like here, Dolly is very accessible. Like they might not know her, but again, it's the brand. And for example,
Yeah.
in my local area, kids get the Dolly Parton Imagination Library.
Mm.
And it is this sort of weird thing that like local kids in London having Dolly send them, the personalized happy birthday message.
Hmm.
So you have this whole other side of Dolly Parton, like a brand awareness, which I think is a different element because of our disconnectedness from country.
Yeah. I also think that this is kind of pointing out this idea of like the transcultural idea of fandom. Like I know there's been a lot of fan studies looking at from Japanese to other cultures is when you look at anime and manga. But it would be interesting to look more at maybe like the Western going out too, because I know my partner Chris, he's done a work looking at how other countries across time again have adopted the Western and or aspects of the Western tropes and whatnot, and put them in their own movies and whatnot. But then one of the reasons to do that would be because those things are speaking to people. There's something about the Western and the cowboy and imagery and all of that that speaks to people, and it's similar to the dissemination of the superhero. Again, an American cultural trope that was designed, another monomyth that was created, and yet it's been disseminated and adopted. And there's something about it that's speaking to people that is creating transcultural fandoms that could be explored more.
I mean, I think it's useful to look at like it's like film manuals for at least the ones I've got. I literally found in my local charity shop, bizarrely, for evangelical Christian like teaching, but film manuals. So it's like you need to watch a film. How can I explain this film that actually everybody in it is Christ? And quite a few of them are Westerns.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's another way of saying like I think claiming that Western, saying actually it's the story of Christ in this way, or it's a parable of this. So I mean it's very canonical, right? It's very fanfic that these books exist at all, but the way that we are teaching you what this actual trope is to fit with our other story, I think is a fascinating. And also that I found these at South London bookshop. Again, it just says something, and like how the knowledge and culture disperses.
It's that recoding aspect that after you do the decoding, you do the recoding. Yeah. That is an interesting aspect too. And it kind of gets at textual poaching, of course, with Jenkins, but just the overall idea of fans creating things. And I know, Christine, before we started streaming, you were talking about fans creating scents or candles in order to relate to books. You want to tell us more about what you're seeing there?
This is not a book candle. This is a video game candle, and you can see my Hollow Knight pillow in the back when I show you this. But yeah, there's I think that there's a cool space of fan creation that hasn't been getting a lot of attention. Like we have a bunch of work on fan art, a bunch of work on fan fiction. We're understanding how people kind of reclaim and reimagine their fan items through these things. But there's also this kind of extra immersion thing that's happening with some of these creations. Like you have entire online shops that are dedicated to candles based on your favorite books, or people making candles based on your favorite video games. And this really, I think, started getting more attention in fandom because of Baldur's Gate 3, where canonically one of the characters has a very specific scent, and so people jumped on that and started making candles based on this scent. But part of the idea is like you can curl up with your favorite book or play your favorite video game and light this candle and have this scent that is supposed to immerse you even more in that experience. Or like I even have some jewelry that is very loosely based on romances in video games. And so it's like this character has given you this necklace with stuff from the video game to make you feel more connected to the fan object as something like created by fans themselves for fans. I just think that those things are really interesting, and it sort of it makes it this experience, both internal and external, to that thing that you love as a fan. And I think that it hasn't got a lot of attention, but I think it's worth paying more attention to. And so that's kind of an area where I'm starting to branch into with my studies.
I think that's fascinating, as I'm like over here staring at my yellow submarine cooler, my vintage.
Yeah.
I'm looking at like, what do I have? Thinking about all my items.
There's also there's tea and absinthe, and there's a Dungeons and Dragons themed business now too, where they make teas. And so they make loose leaf tea bags that are meant to evoke certain types of fandoms too. We have one that's called Second Breakfasts, basically. So it's, you know, it's the Lord of the Rings, or there's the Allons-y, which is a great black tea to be 10th Doctor, which prop time. Here's my sonic screwdriver for that. So there's that aspect too, this way of, there's something about fans wanting to be as close as possible to the thing they love. And so finding more ways to do that is definitely an interesting avenue to look at here.
I mean, to me, this all just screams of relics, right?
Yeah.
And it's DIY relic culture in a very cool way, because you're making a relic out of the fan divine object. Because I just think, again, we should be paying more attention in medieval studies to this kind of, you know, immersive sensory experience. That, again, I'm just like, so medieval.
Awesome.
And vice versa. I think like you have women, for example, who have full-blown sensory experiences with Christ. And it's not just about reading, it's you read and then you smell and then you taste Christ. And that's the package. And that nobody else can do that. Again, it's very DIY. Because I think what is really interesting to me, Christine, what you're saying is, I get almost a vision of an Etsy shop. You know, I don't see it in like, I'm not going to buy it in a big superstore and feel connected in the same way to like the object. I like the idea, I guess, as a fan myself, of that, like, it's only, you know, as a little woman in a kitchen just mixing it together. Whether or not that's true, I think there's something there about it having to be branded, or the feel of it being a bit more DIY for it to work.
It's like you want to know that it's coming from a fan as well.
Exactly. It's like that's a big part of it being a verifiable relic, right? It can't, if it's just from like the corporate machine, it's not as cool somehow. It's not as real.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's interesting too, thinking about this idea of like fan pilgrimages, because I know Rebecca Williams and others have been doing the work on theme parks. But theme parks are, of course, these corporate-owned versions of all this. But then you have people who, I was just seeing a story about fans going on a Harry Styles fan pilgrimage, and how local store owners are, you know, capitalizing on that, perhaps because they're fans as well. And so there's a different type of pilgrimage when you can go out to the place and the people there are in some way maybe connected to it. But then it's, you know, you go to a theme park and you spend all of this money, but it's a very corporate controlled immersive experience versus a more of a DIY immersive experience.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I'll just speak from the Beatles world. If you spend time in Liverpool and you want to do a Beatles tour, I always have advice on that if anyone wants that. You can go to the Beatles story on the dock, and it's really interesting. It has relics. The Eleanor Rigby grave looks nothing like the real one. Or you can hit the 75 bus and go where I lived during lockdown, to Woolton Village. And it was a good place to live during lockdown. And you can go to St. Peter's Church and see the actual grave. And then you can go to the hall if it's open, but you can at least stand outside where Paul and John, you know, our reporters have met. And then you can walk to John's house. You can't go in it unless you're on a tour. But I mean, and that to me is way more exciting than going through a museum. Now, there is a new museum that opened on Matthews Street where I call it the cavern replica because it's not the original cavern that the Beatles were playing, but it's fine. Rogue Best, which would be Pete Best's brother, which is, you know, one of the drummers for the Beatles before Ringo, opened a museum. And I think that there's this idea that it's more authentic because a Best owns it, because somebody who was not technically part of that world originally because he would have been born later, but anyways, is part of that. And there's that connection there, I think, that people like more because they feel that's real. Whereas who owns this other one? How do they know the Beatles? You know, and I think that's really important, as you said, like that idea that the fan actually, maybe a fan or someone connected is actually doing it is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Christine.
I was just gonna say, I think it's sort of interesting because I deal with a lot of highly fictionalized spaces. And so in a way, maybe these extra immersive experiences are like a pilgrimage. Like I can't actually go to this place, but I have the scent of this place now, and so it's like I'm there. But I'm also curious, and I'm sure someone's done work on this. But like when you have fictionalized versions of real places, like something like Outlander, like do people take a lot of pilgrimages to Scotland to try to experience like something that I hadn't considered before? Very interesting.
This was the first thing. I went to Scotland and my mom goes, "Oh, Outlander." So I brought her back a postcard. I had to get her a postcard. But like even thinking beyond like the pop culture world, I had to go to Inverness and look for Nessie, you know?
Yeah, same.
And there might be a Loch Ness monster on my ankle now.
I think
This is
yes,
fandom.
This is from Inverness. Yeah.
But I have
That was my fan pilgrimage, was to go find Nessie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is talking about this like virtual spaces, right? I mean, and that there was a tradition of virtual pilgrimage in the Middle Ages where you see just like set up in your garden kind of thing. And now we go to Jerusalem, somebody will light some incense. That'll be just like Jesus. So, and I think that speaks again to the effective propulsion of it, the compulsion to place yourself there where the action is, and the way in which it's a full body experience, and the way in which fans create that active, because I think, at least again in my part of the world, where we're getting a little bit of fan studies in medieval, but really, I mean, it's a very little bit. There's still like people can go, oh, fan fiction, okay, right, text, okay, maybe a pilgrimage, or Graceland, okay, but saying something about sense or again full-bodied immersion is still not really acknowledged as like a fan phenomena yet. So Christine, I think that like your point is really great, that there's so much there.
Yeah, and there's that idea too, thinking about it not just affectively, but I think about the human potential for this imaginative literacy, to be able to create, to be able to transubstantiate, and all of these things that we do to rationalize and to convince ourselves and others about what is real and what isn't real, and all of that is such a important aspect to fandom. And it's the more of that cognitive aspect that I think we might need to look more into as well, because we talk a lot about, of course, the affect, which of course we should, but how we make sense of these things and how we rationalize to ourselves, I think, is another really important aspect of fandom that we should be studying.
I was actually thinking about, like you were talking about the sense. I have two thoughts. One, I'm curious if the creators of these spaces have smelled the sense and said, yes, this is what I think, and like approve it. And then also I think of like Harry Potter. I think they've done that franchise has done an amazing job with, actually you can get and make a butterbeer. You can get a chocolate frog or the nasty jelly beans and play the game. And then you can actually feel like, you know, this, it makes it more real in that sense of that fiction. You can share that experience with somebody. But I am curious though, if like the creators, I know they're not all very popular, have had the items and said, that's what I imagined.
Yeah, that would be something really interesting to look at, because I'm sure that there are some that have been like, oh, cool, someone made this thing based on this other thing I made, and I want to know what this is like. I'm gonna segue-ish, but we can hop back. Something else that I am really interested in fandom are when creators do get involved with fandom, to the point that like even, and I've talked about this in previous ones of these, so sorry for going back on this, but like to the point that even some creative things are essentially a fan's fan fiction that becomes a new fan item. Like, so like the obvious one would be like 50 Shades of Grey, but like you also have the Hannibal TV show, where it was a reimagining and a queering of the story in ways that are very fan-like, but the creator also consumes fan-made items. Like you can see pictures of him in fan-made t-shirts that are shipping Will and Hannibal. So I think the creator being involved with fandom or consuming fandom in the same way as other fans is also really interesting. Or like you could think about Neil Gaiman and how active he is with fans on something like Tumblr. And how does that change the fan experience? How does that change how fans consume the fan item when they have so much access to a creator and can actually get their questions answered? Like if creators were more involved, someone could probably be like, hey, I have this candle. Have you smelled this? Do you think that this reflects the character as you imagined them? So I think the layers of creator involvement are also really cool to think about.
Yeah, I would like to like piggyback on what you said on like just a massive amount of information and access fans have nowadays, especially because I write about something that, you know, well, I don't know if you can see it, but like teen magazines, you know, that's pretty much it in the 60s. And even in going into the 70s, that information was mostly very controlled, not in all cases. I want to be clear about that. But so our idea of who these people, these characters or the you know, artists or whatever was very shaped in a certain way for our understanding. So it's interesting that now, like someone like Gaiman can really shape his own understanding to an extent. And I think of hagiography in a lot of this too, because we can't control what's said about us when we die or when we're alive too, right? Rather than that. So there's a good study on, I don't know if you've read it on hagiography. It's Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. She talks about like Kurt Cobain and Joy Division and how they've and the reference to hagiography and how we've like canonized these rock stars and whatnot, as well as other, and it's really, really interesting in that way. Actually, I had a question for your medieval studies. Is this do you ever focus on like, because I instantly think of like the most famous, which is like Hildegard the Benign, and the mysticism. Is mysticism something that you consider in fandom? Because that's something I'm curious about. Is there elements in there?
I think you absolutely can do. I think it depends like who you're calling a fan and their structural relationship to the object and the construction of that relationship. So for example, in my work, I look at hagiographers, like usually the men who write the texts as fans of the women that they are celebrifying through their texts, because it is all about that reciprocal back and forth. But they both need each other for their identity. But then a mystic, on the other hand, could totally be read as a fan of Christ. And at a different point in a text, the church is a fan of the mystic because the church needs the mystic. I think that's what I like, apart from the fact that it's fun, I think, just intellectually, but what I like is it really helps you unpack the power dynamics at play and the fact that it's like a fan needs a celebrity needs a fan, right? Like God, saint, the church, it's this weird intermeshed agency, passivity. Where is the control at any moment? Where is the power? And it for my stuff, because obviously we know very little usually about things. So I can't really look at like the people who consumed, say, the hagiography and understand them as fans. That's where you kind of have to go to that, like the fanfic level to really see the structural things at play. And what I look at a lot, we talk about canonization. I think that's a very interesting word because I say I work on saints, but technically none of them were canonized. So I look at my lay saints. So somebody's written their text and said, you're super holy. And there's maybe some people at the time are like, you're super holy. We love you. We have your relics. But the Vatican, it does not care. Like they don't ever get acknowledged. Like they are minor figures. And yet they are established saints in their very local community. And today I'm studying them. So there's that trans-temporal structural celebrity.
It's so fascinating to me.
It's almost like the lay saints are big name fans.
Yeah.
Well, and
go on.
Oh, I was just gonna, so many people can't read or write at that time, so you wouldn't have the information on what the common people thought. That's tough. Wow.
But then what's interesting is, so most of hagiography, like strictly speaking, we have, it's like men, it's Latin, it's very distant. It's not like the women themselves. But we do have some like auto hagiography, whether it's written by the woman or not, whatever. So like, I look at this 15th century mystic called Marjorie Kemp, who's like in medieval studies, she's very famous, like today, as like Kim Kardashian. Because of that usurping the powers of production, because Marjorie's trying to write her own text, right? And can go around the celebrity manufacture machine, which is the church, the Latin, that manuscript. So I'm interested in a lot of my work about like reality TV stars and reality TV fandom, and that weird, what are they famous for? Kind of for being themselves, but obviously not for being themselves. And how that works as a consumer, and a particular consumer primarily of like their social media output, and like as the star text. I just like, that's where kind of I'm thinking a lot at the moment.
Do you ever imagine what like you said, Marjorie Kemp's Instagram might look like?
It would be so bananas. And that's part of the thing is like, so I looked at, at one point there were 19 Marjorie Kemps on Twitter, like accounts saying they were Marjorie Kemp. So obviously I was like, this is amazing, I will do a deep dive. And it just ranged from people kind of claiming her as an active fandom to people impersonating her. But why do you do that on Twitter? And the comedy thing was people were saying that Marjorie would give the best Twitter because she would be absolutely unhinged because of her text. So it's kind of like, again, who fits our modern models of what would give good, like she is a real housewife. And I think that's a really interesting why she can kind of come back. Do you know what I mean? We found the appropriate celebrity form for her, because she wanted to be a saint basically, and she never was. So it's kind of a sad tale in a way. And yet today, everybody knows the name medieval studies.
This is also pointing out, I think, another area where fan studies could talk more, and that's about why people become the academics they become. Why you have to be a fan of this thing you're going to devote your life to studying. And that has to have a fandom component to it.
Like an ACA fan, I think is the term, right? That is very common.
Yeah, but even more than that, because I think about natural sciences, and I mean, I love astronomy and quantum physics and everything like that, but I wouldn't have the same passion to go and actually devote my life to studying it. But I think about how at some point, the people who go through all of the higher education, get the doctorates, I mean, possibly, going into college early and all this stuff, but the amount of emotional motivation it takes, the passion to get through all of that, can that be seen then as similar to other fans who, maybe they're not going out and learning how to write or something like that, but they're learning how to make candles, or they're learning how to do this or do that in order to be able to express their passion. I think the fuel that the fire that fuels an academic's passion, I think, is similar to what fuels any type of fan's passion.
Like 1,000,000%. I literally said that in like my first book, and I ruffled quite a few medievalist feathers. We're not supposed to think of ourselves as low culture, apparently, I got told.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. And what I find that we are so capable of thinking analytically as academics, but the second you say just structurally, like A is to B and C is to D, doesn't that work? It falls apart if there is this taint of the common, or particularly medieval studies, it's too new. It's too, the lowbrow, it's a bit gauche. And I've basically become like a sin eater for people at conferences, because they come up and go, I really think Gossip Girl is just like an Arthurian romance. Like they come and confess their pop cultural, and because they love a thing, and because they also love medieval studies, and they think about it the same way, but it's taboo. It is like, I'm just like, it's okay. come to me. I think it's great. Write an article. And that's sad, right? It's a loss for all of us.
Yeah.
Because that's exciting work.
Yeah, you know, to be fair, like when I went off to do the MA and so years ago, Liverpool Hope, they don't have anymore now. It's at Uni of Liverpool, but they introduced the Beatles popular music and society degree. And when I went to go do that, it was like, oh, that's cute. Oh, what do you talk about Paul all day? Oh, and anywhere I go, I don't tell people about that background. I just use the next degree, honestly, because and my fandom is constantly challenged, especially by older male fans. It's what do you know? Oh, I know more trivia than you. I should have a master's in the Beatles. I was like, well, you can have my PhD in cultural studies. I don't care.
Yeah.
If you're gonna be so rude to me, then maybe I'll just, anyways, so it's hard, especially in a very male-dominated space, which a lot of females have really claimed the space, like Dr. Christine Tomlinson and many, many others. And it is hard sometimes, though, definitely being like the female in there. And I write about I don't think the lowest form of popular culture. You can't see it all. There's some monkeys right there for you. Teen magazines. One time I had a very temporary advisor, and I don't think he liked something I wrote, and that's okay. And he said, often when you're really involved in what you write about, you sound like it. And I was like, oh, I think that was a huge insult. So we have to talk about like this, even in the rock world, there's that high culture, which is like rock, and then low, which is pop. And so we talk about like field theory, like Bourdieu's field theory and whatnot, and think about these things. But yes, I feel that pain of being talking about teen fan magazines, especially when they're seen so negatively and as ephemeral and unimportant, that I definitely get that often, like, oh, that's cute. That's cute. What's your real study though? Like what did you really study? And I was like, well, it's actually really important and really interesting. Read the book. That's what I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel that. And I was a history major originally. And something happened at my university halfway during my PhD studies, and my advisors something shook up, and I changed advisors. I ended up with the perfect ones for me. In a whole nother department, but I did reach out to the history department first because my department was dissolved and I was left in limbo. And the historian was just he's like, I don't think so. How do you cite? And I said, I use Chicago. Okay. Just very like, I don't know, this isn't ancient history, or this isn't Irish history, or whatever he was focused on, and from the 19th century. And I was like, okay, but this is still important. So I feel the pain of that, and that's why I go to popular culture conferences now.
Well, and it's kind of why I've been wanting to do more when it comes to looking at politics as fandom too, because especially with the stuff I've done on QAnon, a lot of people when they do criticisms of QAnon or Trump supporters or so on and so forth, they're focused on the beliefs that people have, so that cognitive aspect, which that's important. But I don't think it's the most important. I think it is the emotions. And I think for so long, again, in the United States at least, we've been so focused on you can't have emotions in politics. Emotions are antithetical to democracy and blah, 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 blah. But everything that we see happening demonstrates that is not the case, that emotions are very important to democracy. And until we can get past this idea of demonizing emotions, which is a very anti-feminist, patriarchal approach, way to control people, blah, blah, blah. But until we can do that and embrace the relevance of the affect, I don't think we're going to be able to really address not just these issues of legitimization in academic fields, but just some of the major problems that we're having in the world right now.
I mean,
I agree.
Sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
I was saying I've experienced this in a new to me way recently, because my book is called Medieval Twitter, the new one, and it is about how Twitter is medieval and the medieval is Twitter. And it's written in the tone of a Twitter thread. Like, I use slang. I have memes in it. I write, sometimes I hope it might be funny, but there's also a lot of footnotes. There's a lot of technical analysis. And talking through, like, with my publisher and reviewers, meeting that wall, and I'm saying, okay, but why is this not scholarly? If I'm literally giving you a close textual analysis, but I'm saying it's also like a meme. There's the gatekeeping element of it, which is political, particularly in academia right now, with the job market, with who gets to speak, who gets the job, who even gets published. I think challenging again this, like, I am a fan, at least in part because it really upsets some people that I say that about myself as a scholar, because I think that's a productive moment, because what we do is also political.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I when I go to conferences, I actually have the editor I write about. Her name is Judith Sims, so I got on a shirt. But I have another one that says Rolling Stone wasn't first. I like to wear it. So people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, let's talk about this. Talk about these teen magazines. Oh no, I'm like, yes, let's do it. So yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Oh, I was going to add that community is something that I have to talk about a lot with these magazines. And I think that we do focus on community, but I think in the fandom world, we could do more. In different ways, like in all the elements that you guys talked about, like an emotion, it doesn't just have to be. I think there was a really interesting PhD thesis at Bowling Green that focused on parrot head online communities, like Jimmy Buffett. And I thought that was really fascinating. I looked through that and I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. It's not something that I would have even thought about, charitable works and online and like the community between the parrot heads. And I was like, okay, I want more of this. I want more of this.
Christine, anything to add there?
I mean, I do a lot of my work on just online community around pop culture items, usually like TV, movies, and especially obviously video games. But it's so interesting how important the emotional element of consuming is. Like, and building communities around that, like sharing your emotional experiences. What were the most devastating parts of what it was you watched or read? Like, what was something that made you feel emotionally closer to a particular character? And I think that it's so interesting that we're talking about these kinds of pushback. Like, obviously there are a ton of gender dynamics in video games, and the same kinds of like, oh, you really think you're a fan? Okay, so what is this really obscure piece of information about Hideo Kojima or something like that?
Yes.
And it's there are so many layers to like gatekeeping and identity and trying to find your own path or position within these communities, which is like part of why I'm studying these sub-communities where people can craft these new identities as a particular kind of fan, which becomes so important when you have these levels of gatekeeping pushing people out. But yeah, the emotion thing also being denigrated in studies is so interesting because it is such a huge part of what it is to be a fan and to consume these fan items and to be part of these communities. It's what drives you to be part of these communities, but people don't really want to think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say, we humans are social animals. And I think one of the things we don't like hearing is the animal part there too, because one of the things you look at other mammals and birds and fish and whatnot, you see the emotions. Their affect is essentially what they are. And to remember that that is primarily what we are too, I think scares some people because it kind of flies in the face of a lot of religious teachings in some way. Sorry, go ahead, Allison.
Oh, I was just going to add, like I said earlier, with teen girls, especially early on, consuming, like you say, these consumption, how much money was spent, who was buying the records, who was really encouraging this. And I think in fandom too, I can tell, Christine, your shirt looks like a fandom shirt.
It is.
Okay.
It's a D&D Bard shirt.
Okay. We as women spend a lot of money on things. I know in the 90s, if the Hanson or the Spice Girls were on something, if I had the money, I bought it. And then in the early 2000s, it was all Red Hot Chili Peppers for me or Jim Morrison. And I started doing my rock and roll face. And I wanted that Beatles lunchbox when I was 14. I know it's later, but still, I was like, I want these things. I want people to know. I want to find my people and share. There was a bit of gatekeeping because I learned early on that rockism is how I should act. Well, it's not true, but I think we go through those phases, but we spend so much money on these things. I feel like in fandom, like you said, just this idea of consumption is so important because who's buying it? Who's really driving it? And why aren't especially female voices being heard if we're the ones who are really encouraging the success of these things? And I think Taylor Swift is a great example in the music world.
Yeah.
She has, her fans are incredible. Actually, at the last Popular Culture Association conference, there was 25 papers on Taylor Swift just in the music. There were a lot of things to talk about. People are not afraid anymore. And I think we're starting to move forward in that way. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And like the friendship bracelets and the community sense, there's so many cool things going on. And I'm hoping that, as you know, I know this conversation is about what we need to talk about more, but I think, you know, female fandom and what we're accomplishing for other success, I think is very important that we continue to focus on.
Well, and I have a feeling, and maybe Christine, maybe I'm wrong about this, but those candles, I'm going to guess, are being made by female fans.
Yep.
Yeah.
And probably majority consumed by, but I have no data on that.
Yeah, it's because again, there's the gender stereotypes that men aren't into candles or scents or things like that, which I do think is also changing. But thinking about Taylor Swift, I imagine there's gotta be fans out there who are making scents to try to replicate what she might smell like. I have a feeling that's going to be out there too. Because you know I mean, perfume companies do that type of thing all the time. So fans probably can do it as well now.
Well, didn't they used to dig up saints and smell them, like Saint Teresa of Avila? So I know not technically medieval, but close period. So yeah.
But also that the intimacy that involves, like you smell like Taylor Swift, and like sort of the reverse reminds me of like the Goop candle when it was Gwyneth Paltrow's vagina that she said that's what it smelled like as a candle, because thanks Gwyneth. And like who was buying this? It was very expensive, obviously. I don't get it, but it kind of like that's also part of her weird crunchy celebrity, that she's got a candle that she is telling you smells like her vagina.
I think she's trying to convince herself that her vagina smells that way.
Right. And that it was then widely reported on, right? It's that kind of like titillating item that now Gwyneth Paltrow is in the news again. And that just like when are you burning that? But how your house now is like Gwyneth Paltrow's, but you know, and there's this weird body and space and intimacy in very odd ways.
Well, there's also like, because in professional wrestling, one of the things that wrestlers will often sell to fans are their used gear. So the clothes they wore in the match that still has their sweat and scent on it. And that there's that idea of it's the intimacy of having particles in your nose and mouth that come off of the thing that you love.
Yeah, I think what people collect celebrity body parts, right? Like John Lennon's tooth or something like that. I wonder if the London Vagina Museum sells that candle.
I don't know, you know. I just remember it was all like it was sold out on Goop, and there was this whole
Interesting.
There's also I feel like there was a big thing semi-recently about female streamers selling like their bathwater. So yeah, another level of this kind of fandom wanting to be close to the person that is the object of your fandom.
Because it's a contact relic. Like I think why the medieval context also helps is because it shows you like relic culture is utterly transactional. It is a commercial thing. You want as many bits of your saint as possible because that's how you get pilgrims and money and prestige. And like that's the same with these. Like when I saw the bathwater thing, I was just like, yes, genius. Like you are a 13th century mystic. like you could literally like quote a paragraph and it's like, look what you're doing, OnlyFans creator. Yes. And that we have these things that recur in these structural ways, I think is noteworthy and interesting and intriguing.
Well, I think we're getting to some very interesting areas here, but we're at the end of our time. I'm sorry, the bathwater thing I think got me because I'm also like, well, you can easily just fake that too, so you can make a lot of money off of that.
You could.
Oh, I think there's so many potentials, directions to go off of this. So I want to thank all of you for coming in and and at least enlightening me and hopefully enlightening other people. And now I just want to read all of your work. So I can't wait to see it when it comes out. And I think that with minds like yours, the future of fan studies is just going to be robust, because it sounds like we're just going to be able to keep going further and further, pushing the boundaries. And hopefully at some point we get to this, not necessarily legitimization of fan studies, just that, because yeah, that's important, but also just helping people realize that emotions are not evil. I think that would be, if that's the legacy of fan studies, that would be such a boon, I think, for Western civilization, at least.
Agreed.
So, thank you all for this.
Thank
Yeah, thank you. And we'll probably come back and talk some more about this. I know we have material fandom is always a good topic to talk about as well. And definitely religion and fandom would also be a great one to talk about too. So keep an eye out for those possible topics in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a great time.
I'm glad you could make it. You were, as someone who also did the Beatles tour in Liverpool, I appreciate when other people who are younger than me still are into the Beatles. So, all right, have a good one, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.